Our next guest is Ashleigh Murphy-Beiner. That's correct. Welcome and thanks for having us. Ashleigh is an assistant psychologist at the Center of Psychedelic Research at the Imperial College in London. A couple of weeks ago, I had the pleasure of meeting her at the Breaking Convention, where she was given a workshop on preparation and integration for the psychedelic experience. Then she also is trained mindfulness meditation teacher and has assisted ceremonies in Peru. She has also completed further training in embodied therapeutic practices and has a great interest in the interdisciplinary application of each of these approaches to the therapeutic use of psychedelics. Today, she is going to be talking about the Ayahuasca afterglow and the possible therapeutic effects of it. Welcome.
This one, okay. Hi, thank you all for being here. And thank you very much for the award. That's the first thing I want to say to Insight. Thank you, and for the opportunity to be here and to present. I'm really grateful and really happy to be sharing this research about ayahuasca, which I conducted as part of my master's in psychology with Dr. Kirsty Saw. So, there's just a huge now growing body of therapeutic evidence, clinical evidence, supporting ayahuasca's therapeutic potential. So here, predominantly looking at depression, anxiety, and addictions, there's good evidence for that now growing. There's also some preliminary evidence for borderline personality traits, which is being done by Dominguez Clave. Some preliminary evidence for support for eating disorders as well by LaFrance and Lozaga-Velda. And also grief, in processing grief and bereavement after loss by Gonzalez. So my research, I guess, developed really from a desire to understand how this is possible, how such kind of incredible effects can be happening. And I was working inpatient at the time in mental health in the UK, and so it was very clear to me that there is a desperate need for more effective treatments to support people. So I'll just do a little bit of background. I'm sure most of you know lots about this already, but what's ayahuasca? So it's a combination of two plants, Banisteriopsis caapi and Psychotria viridis. Banisteriopsis caapi contains the beta-carbolines, which have monoamine oxidase inhibiting properties and allow the uptake of the DMT in the Psychotria viridis into the central nervous system. So ayahuasca has, ayahuasca has kind of expanded globally over the last 25 years, and it's really not possible to even begin to kind of contextualize that process in a presentation of this length. But just to say that it's now in many different ceremonial contexts, religious, indigenous, shamanic, neo-shamanic, and despite being in those very different contexts, I suppose it's still really most often experienced in ceremonial contexts with the intention of healing and with self-understanding, and/or maybe. Okay, so thinking a little bit about the mechanisms of action, there are some pharmacological mechanisms of action. There's quite a good, strong evidence base for these. So, like the other classical psychedelics, we know that ayahuasca works on the works as a 5-HT2A receptor agonist, and that's likely to play a key role in the therapeutic outcomes because of the effect of serotonin on mood and neuroplasticity. Reba is also now looking at the effect of harmine, harmaline, and tetrahydroharmine. So those are the compounds in the vine, because actually they also have an effect on the body, and we don't know that much about it. So there's still more possible pharmacological mechanisms there. So there's also the afterglow effect to consider with all classical psychedelics, and definitely no different for ayahuasca. So possibly also secondary pharmacological mechanisms are contributing here to the positive mood and increased well-being that lasts for about 2 to 4 weeks is documented, but there is some evidence that may be up to 2 months. And what's really interesting to me about this is that it offers increased therapeutic potential. potentially. So to actually work with people in this phase when they're more open and maybe have more motivation and hope, this might be a really good point in which to work with people. But what about the psychological mechanisms? So we know something about the pharmacology, but ayahuasca is not only making changes in the brain, it's also leading to a profoundly altered state of consciousness which is experienced subjectively. And actually we know very little about what psychological mechanisms might be involved or how they might affect mood and well-being in the afterglow period specifically. So, there are likely many psychological mechanisms, but I just looked at two in this study. I looked at mindfulness and at cognitive flexibility. And the reason that I chose to look at these two, rather than any of the possible other ones, is that there's a really large clinical evidence base for mindfulness and for cognitive flexibility for treating patients with depression, with anxiety, with addictions. So there's a kind of crossover with the same disorders that ayahuasca is able to have a therapeutic effect on. And I'm actually going to spend a little bit of time fleshing out what these are before I go on to present the study and the results. And I'm going to do that just because I think it's really easy to get into our heads with concepts like these. And actually, they are embodied practices. And you know, as a therapist, you can't really expect to just sit down in a room with a patient with depression, tell them about mindfulness or give them a book about it, or talk to them about mental flexibility and then expect that everything's going to get better. So I think it's really important that we kind of go into them in a little bit more depth and really kind of feel them a bit. Okay. And also that, yeah, patients really need direct experience because we all need direct experience of them. So what is mindfulness? It's a type of contemplative practice from Buddhism, and it's now secularized in the West. I suppose it's really about cultivating a certain quality of awareness, one which is focused on the present moment and is really involved in stepping back from the content of our minds and starting to look at the processes. So actually, in fact, maybe looking, and this is why I chose this image, looking at our minds rather than looking through them. So it's a completely kind of different reference point to ourselves. So it's also related to decentering, which is a really important aspect of mindfulness and also a mechanism of change in mindfulness itself. This is really about stepping back and being able to observe ourselves from a different space. And really, a very important thing to say is that this is all much easier said than done, which I know firsthand and that I see working with everybody that is trying to learn mindfulness. And I'm sure if you have tried it, you'll also know. So, oops, sorry. In psychology, mindfulness is considered to be a multifaceted construct and to have 5 facets. And these are the 5 facets here. And I won't go into too much detail now. We can talk about them a bit later. But they're observe, describe, act with awareness, non-judging, and non-reactive. And at this point, what's important is that they break down into 2 main groups. So the first group is attention regulation, and the second is emotional acceptance. And these are just different groups of facets. Hopefully, fairly self-explanatory. Okay, so why though? What's mindfulness got to do with ayahuasca? Well, people with depression, well, across many different psychopathologies, the people that have those maybe depression, anxiety, or addictions are often low in mindfulness skills. They tend to be low in all 5 facets. And yeah, you can see some research here also from Reba's psychedelic research group. They found an association between mindfulness and ayahuasca and increases in the 24 hours after. And they found the facets that they found to change were non-judging and non-reactive. They found just the emotional acceptance facets to be changed. Okay, so the next psychological mechanism is cognitive flexibility. So the definition that I have here for that is it's the ability to shift perspective or approach in order to adapt to change in the environment. It involves executive function abilities of problem solving and response inhibition. So we can break that down a little bit. Problem solving is quite simple, really. It's about being able to have more than one possible solution to a problem, being able to conceive of multiple solutions. Response inhibition is good to understand maybe when you open a packet of biscuits and you eat just one or two biscuits rather than an entire packet of biscuits. That's the helpful voice in our head that is inhibiting the response to eat the whole packet all at once. And actually, it's also changed now to be a broader definition of mental flexibility. And this is something that I want to give you an example of. And it's from my own work, actually. So I was doing some sessions with patients on the psilocybin trial in the aftercare, so after they've left the study. So they're with patients who've had really positive experiences, and then they have left the study and they can't access any more psilocybin therapy, obviously, because of the legal status right now. And that was very difficult for some of them. And I found myself become quite stuck in a psychological mindset where I felt very sad. I felt sad for them, and I got stuck into not being able to see, other than to just be with them and hold them in that pain, what else could be done. So I went to supervision. We have an amazing supervisor, Dr. Tim Reed, and he suggested a new way to look at it, a new perspective. So he suggested that, in fact, whilst this was an ending of their current psilocybin therapy, it actually wasn't the end of seeking or understanding about the depression. And that completely reframed it for me. So I could then suddenly have a lot of creativity freeing up inside me of, okay, well, what other ways are there? What possible things can they do to kind of learn more about themselves, to learn more about the depression, to continue on their journey of recovery? I think what's also really important about that example is that for me, when I felt stuck in a psychological mindset, I realized that I could ask for help, but many of the patients that we work with, actually, they might start to become very hard on themselves at that point, and then spiral into further disconnection and isolation, and be less able to get what they need in terms of support. So, this is basically what it says. Inflexibility and rigid thinking is a key feature of psychopathology. It's just really important to contextualize that and wonder what do we know about cognitive flexibility and ayahuasca? Well, actually, the truth is that we don't know very much. This is the first study that has looked at cognitive flexibility as a psychological mechanism of change in the therapeutic effects, and it's the first study to look at ayahuasca to look at cognitive flexibility changes associated with ayahuasca in the afterglow period. What we do know is kind of encapsulated in some of these papers here. So we've got some neuroimaging by Carhart-Harris with psilocybin, some neuropsychological evidence by Boso and Kuipers, and there's some more of this neuroimaging and neuropsychological evidence, which is suggesting that there's a loosening of cognitive grip and more flexibility in the brain, which may be very supportive. So, on to the study. The aim and hypotheses of this study, we aim to assess changes in mindfulness and cognitive flexibility over 2 time points, baseline and within 24 hours after ayahuasca use. We predicted a significant increase in participants' total mindfulness and decentering scores in the 24 hours after taking ayahuasca compared to baseline. And we also explored whether changes in cognitive flexibility are associated with ayahuasca use in the same afterglow period. So this is the sample. We had 48 healthy participants. 54% of them were female. The mean age was 39 years old. And it was a predominantly white sample, highly educated to degree level and above, and English-speaking predominantly. So this was the previous ayahuasca use within the study. So the range of previous lifetime use was between 0 and 130 times. I forgot to turn my pages. One person in the, there were 6 psychedelic naive people in the sample. One person in the sample last used ayahuasca 2 weeks before, and the rest of the sample hadn't used for 1 month or more. And that's obviously important because we're looking at the afterglow effect. So we were trying to capture the afterglow effect at 24 hours after, so of a dose they had within those 24 hours, and not any other afterglow effects of 2 or 4 weeks before, for example. So we're quite confident that that was okay. Okay, these are the measures that we used. They're a combination of self-report measures and neuropsychological tasks. The 5 Facets Mindfulness Questionnaire and the Experiences Questionnaire are looking at mindfulness. The Experiences Questionnaire measures decentring, which is what I talked about earlier. The Cognitive Flexibility Scale is a self-report measure of cognitive flexibility, so a subjective scale. And then we had 2 tasks, the Stroop and the Wisconsin picture card sorting task, which were both looking at cognitive flexibility. I'm actually not going to present the Stroop results today because of time, but if you want to ask me any questions at another time about that, then please do. So this is the Wisconsin picture card sorting task. It's a set shifting task, and it's looking at problem solving and response inhibition. So on this one, participants are basically asked to match the card at the bottom with a question mark to one of the cards at the top, but they're not told the rule by which they match, so they don't know. They just have to guess. And then they're told, are they correct or are they incorrect? And then at some point, they hopefully work out what the rule is, because the rule could be that you are sorting by type of shape, the color, or the number of shapes on the card. So this is an absolutely horrible task to give to somebody 24 hours after ayahuasca. It's bad enough before. Okay, so this is the analysis that we conducted. We did an ANCOVA conducted on all outcome measures. At baseline and 24 hours post, and we put previous ayahuasca lifetime use as a covariate because of the wide range of previous use in the study. We additionally did a 2x2 repeated measures ANCOVA on the Stroop, but I won't go into that. So these are the results for the Wisconsin picture card sorting task. Here you can see on the left the mean reaction time. So this wasn't significantly different. They were a bit slower, but it wasn't statistically significant. But they did answer many more times correctly. So there was a significant increase in correct answers post-ayahuasca without a significant slowing of response time, indicating some improvement in cognitive flexibility on this task. We did also change the order of the trials to try and minimize the practice effect, which is obviously always a little bit there. This is the results for the questionnaires. So here you can see all of the ones that were statistically significant highlighted. It starts with the FFMQ, the mindfulness ones at the top. And what you can see is that 4 of the 5 mindfulness facets were statistically significant. The experiences questionnaire also was, and the cognitive flexibility scale. Those are the mindfulness ones. And what's also interesting on here is that the post-ayahuasca mean score for the experiences questionnaire was higher than the total reported in a sample of experienced meditators. And Solar also found that. So it's really interesting, especially when the baseline is already that high, to see that the ayahuasca is still increasing, but just a small amount, but still increasing from a high baseline is interesting. and that's the cognitive flexibility scale. And here you can see them just displayed a bit differently. So you can see that they were, on the mindfulness ones, they did all increase. The non-judge one just wasn't significant. And you can see that of the ones that were statistically significant, it's a combination of both emotional acceptance and attention regulation facets. And because in people with depression and, predominantly depression, they're low in all of the mindfulness facets. This is a really interesting finding that actually we're starting to see maybe ayahuasca increases all of the facets and not just the emotional acceptance ones. And the other one is for the Experiences Questionnaire and the Cognitive Flexibility Scale. And you can see on all of them, the effect sizes, it's small to modest. Okay, so what some of this means is, also what I wanted to mention was that previous experience had no effect on the results, so it didn't change the significance of anything. So I guess thinking clinically about that is significant because whether you're psychedelic naive or you've drunk 130 times, ayahuasca is having the power to increase mindfulness. So clinically, it's potentially possible that there would be an increase for patients after a single first dose, which is very promising. So overall, these findings suggest ayahuasca, may be helpful clinically and also helps to understand that maybe mindfulness and cognitive flexibility are implicated as mechanisms of change. The evidence is preliminary and a lot of further research is needed, and of course there are also a lot of limitations to a study of this kind, so it's also always caveated in that. Used safely in combination with psychotherapy, ayahuasca might be able to help increase patients' mindfulness and flexible thinking, which we know promotes psychological well-being and improves mental health. Perhaps because of this, ayahuasca may also work similarly to our existing mainstream treatments. So the kind of third wave behavior therapies are some of the predominant therapies that we're using, and they're transdiagnostic like ayahuasca. They're working across a number of different disorders. So what this potentially offers is a way to accelerate the treatment, so to improve the efficacy and to help people to achieve outcomes more quickly. And I think, I teach mindfulness, and this is something that it's a really, really, really difficult thing to learn. It truthfully is. And if you are struggling with very severe mental health problems, it's a really tall order. And I'm amazed and humbled by the efforts that people put into to really developing their practice. It's really humbling. And it's really hard work. So something that can support them in that process is, for me, it seems very, very valuable and very, very much worth continuing to investigate. So I actually wanted to share with you, because I think also in all of this data, it's easy to get quite far from what the point of this research really is. And I guess it's to really support patients in their recovery journeys. So this is somebody from the psilocybin for depression trial right now that I'm working with. And this is a quote from him, which says, "The mind wanders. The mind will wander. I tell myself the wandering is not a failure and accept it. Try to accept it." Now, this is from somebody who is really, really, really hard on himself and really, really also motivated and really trying to change. But that is a big deal. That he's trying to accept it is a really, really big deal, and I want to honor him for that. The other thing that I really want to bring up here is that ayahuasca also gives a direct experience of mindfulness and a flexible thinking. So in these experiences, if what's happening is that there are changes to mindfulness facets, if attention is becoming, attentional processes are becoming different, and if flexibility in thinking is becoming different, then there is an actual experience of that, a direct experience whilst people are in their bodies and very alive to those sensations. And that's incredibly valuable. And I think in terms of going beyond psychedelic experiences, we know that integration is so important. So, an amount of ayahuasca sessions or an amount of psilocybin sessions probably won't be enough to alone completely transform somebody's mental health. And there's a real importance to do work and to have embedded and grounded practices which help to bring the insights into daily life beyond the psychedelic experiences themselves. And I think having that direct experience helps people to have the hope and motivation which can be so desperately missing. So, I wanted to end on this quote here, which is from the same patient, from something that he observed being mindful. A sense of wider perspective immediately following Tai Chi practice, an hour concentrating on posture, movement, weight, sense of one's own bodily self. Awareness is focused in the body. Observed. Surprise, relief that my mood was not darker. I expected to be fiercely down with the legal process going on. The problem is there, but it surprised me that I was not consumed by a deepening spiral of dark thoughts and hopelessness. Maybe some of this stuff really does help. Dare I trust? Thank you.
Thank you for your wonderful research. Here you have.
Thank you. Oh, that's so lovely. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Are you taking questions?
I'm so nervous, desperate to get off. But yes, I would love your questions.
So first, thank you for your talk. I have two questions, basically. I will form a light one at the beginning, and then have the one which is bugging me more, and it's probably a harder one. Okay. So you said that it builds motivation and hope, and I was thinking, okay, that's nice if that trip goes good or decent, but what happens if that trip is difficult or horrific? Because that happens to people too, right? Ayahuasca is known to be able to teleport you to heaven and hell. So I was wondering if you...
Absolutely, it's a very, very good point, yeah. So I think I was referring to the mindfulness practice around the experiences. So kind of having them, I think I didn't actually talk about this. What I meant to talk about was having them as a bit of a handrail after the experiences. So whether the experience is positive or negative, having a practice is a bit like having a handrail to deal with it. Does that make sense? I'm really glad that you brought that up because I meant to mention that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. And then you said that ayahuasca increases mindfulness, and I couldn't help but ask myself, how do you know that? Because what you do know is that ayahuasca, in the context of this specific tradition or context of a shaman having experience in that and doing it in a very specific way. We don't have any standardized protocol for that.
Yeah.
That apparently does modify mindfulness, but the rest I don't feel you know.
Absolutely. So it's an association at this point, and there's some other research that also supports that association coming out from Reba's research team in Spain. And they're looking at, I think at the moment they've just started a new study looking at mindfulness psychotherapy combined with ayahuasca. So yeah, absolutely. At this point, there are no definite answers and there's no certainty. This is worth investigating from my side, I think. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Hi, thank you for your research and presentation. Just a question around the spirit of ayahuasca. And obviously, as a researcher, it's quite difficult to bring something like the spirit of a plant into a clinical environment. But anyone who's worked with the plant knows it's or at least from a perspective that it's very much the spirit that's with the plant. So maybe your thoughts on how to bring that into a more scientific perspective, and if that's even possible. And could you even answer the question around psilocybin as well, and possibly the spirit of psilocybin, considering that you work with that too? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, and I think I certainly don't know at this stage. ayahuasca obviously it's actually, it's not now in one specific, even considering the word spirit with ayahuasca, what that means to all of the different people in all of the different contexts that they're using it is different, actually. It's like healing, the word healing is used in ayahuasca circles, but what that actually means across the different groups and individuals using it is so completely different. So I actually don't know where that process even begins. And of course, within a Western medical framework, it's a challenge because the paradigm is completely different. So I guess at the moment, the best is to, allow people their spiritual experiences. If people have spiritual or mystical experiences with the medicines within, the frameworks that we are working within the Western mental health, then just to support and nurture those like we would any other, like the development of any other or emergence of any other spiritual practice. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashleigh. We now have a short announcement. Nicholas is going to come up.